We're glad you stayed with us. Welcome back to the second part of the Sunday edition right here on KTN News. And studio with me still I have Dismas, Mark and Hezbon Wheeler. We're basically making sense out of almost all the political development that took place in this past week right here in Kenya. And right now we're going to focus on one man, that is the new DPP. Nuruddin Haji is already on record having said that he has enough evidence to nail all the suspects named in the NYS scandal. We have about 54 of them. 30 have been arraigned in court on Monday. It's a proceeding that took place up until late in the night. So let's listen to what he had to say exactly before we continue the discussion.
Conspiracy to commit an offense of corruption, willful failure to comply with applicable procedures and guidelines relating to the management of public funds, a breach of trust by a person employed in the public service, willful neglect to perform official duty, abuse of office, fraudulent acquisition of public property, fraudulent making payment from public revenues for goods not supplied. My office is preparing to have the suspects arraigned in court to answer to the charges tomorrow. In the first phase, investigations revealed that there was no procurement undertaken before monies were paid out. So there was no procurement whatsoever in these investigations, and this is our findings. In phase 2 of the investigations, the DCI will focus on additional areas, including companies or entities that benefited from the fraudulent payment and banks that were complicit to the offenses. In addition to prosecution, we are looking at recovering the proceeds of crime, as well as establishing the tax status of the companies and individuals involved in the crimes. In the meantime, several bank accounts that the funds were channeled through have been frozen.
Of course, there is the new DPP, Nuruddin Haji, there speaking. And of course, this is a man who has already said that he's not talking about tackling the small fish or the big fish, but is now talking about wealth. So, and then this, the president himself, President Uhuru Kenyatta, talking about something interesting as well, and that it has everything to do with the lie detectors. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Initial step, all heads of procurement and accounts in government ministries, departments, agencies, and parastatals will undergo fresh vetting, including polygraph testing, to determine their integrity and suitability. Those who shall fail the vetting will stand suspended. I want officials, particularly senior ones, who are directly implicated in corruption, to have no place in my administration, and for them to go where they belong, which is in jail.
Polygraph testing, lie detectors, apparently that is the new word in town. And will it work in the war against corruption? We have a political risk analyst, we have political analyst, and we have a political communication analyst in studio. But for now, let me begin with you, Dismas. Before we talk about the polygraph testing, let's begin with the new DPP in office. He's talking about dealing with wealth. Ringera apparently in the past years talked about Dragon. PLO Lumumba talked about high voltage files. I mean, does this tough talking amount to anything without action?
Well, it's only time that will tell. But when you look at Nuruddin, he looks like a bright lawyer, and his experience with the National Intelligence Service probably has given him added assets in his new position. That he probably knows who is stealing in Kenya, having gathered that evidence. And then number two, it's interesting that the Inspector General of Police is also ex-National Intelligence Service. And we understand the person who gave President Kenyatta information is Major General Kameru, the guy who is running the National Intelligence Service. So when you have 3 members of the same service running the anti-corruption war, then probability of success is very high. But we should start by asking Nuruddin to ensure, number one, the investigation is very solid. Because majority of the cases, people get acquitted because of shoddy investigations. That are the evidence presented before a magistrate or a judge counts for nothing. It's as good as used toilet paper. So they must be sure that the evidence is very solid. Then number two, the prosecutors are sufficiently motivated. And number three, it must immunize those investigators and prosecutors from these cartels. Because right now we know that cartels work all over. So the same cartels, having stolen 500 billion per year, they can compromise the quality of investigations, they can compromise the quality of prosecutions, and we understand they can actually compromise the quality of judgment or ruling coming from the judiciary. So those are the things that the new DPP is supposed to look at. Mm-hmm. And when you look at all successful public prosecutors, they hardly spend time on TV. We're supposed to see their actions because we know for a fact actions speak louder than words. Mm-hmm. So I would expect that Mr. Nuruddin Haji will have no time for media, giving those threats, giving the promises. Ringera gave those threats and promises. Mm-hmm. They counted for nothing. PLO did the same thing. I mean, we've had so many people coming and giving those threats and promises, which counts for nothing. Mm-hmm. Let people see the action coming from the DPP's office, and then we'll credit him for that. But Haji will be a successful failure if the president does not crush those corruption cartels. Mm-hmm. Because it's only the president of the Republic of Kenya, the Honorable Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, who has the powers to crush those cartels. Nuruddin Haji would have the best intentions in the world, but you have those cartels having stolen money from NYS. When you've got a lot of money, you can compromise almost everybody through the chain. And if the president is not able to do that, mm-hmm. then all of us will sit here yawning for the next 10 years.
Mark, do you think the new DPP is the fresh blood we all have been looking for in the working draft?
Definitely. What is impressive for me is for the first time we saw the rank and file being arraigned in court, all the way from permanent secretary all the way to the clerical officer who is what is called the first approver, mm-hmm. which is the first time we are looking at a DPP basically tackling the system, because when you tackle it like that, it is everybody who is involved in that system who is being taken to task and who's being investigated and who has been arraigned in court. That mm-hmm. is number one. Number two, like I said before, you can see the approach that I talked about that the untouchables used. Please find one law by which you can get these people convicted. Abuse of office, corruption, participation in fraudulent procurement, whatever it is. And that is why some of these people have up to 10 charges. Why? Because at least one of them should stick. And that's what we need as a country. He needs to be determined that there is a law that you broke and we will charge you for it. Because we may not have, let's say, enough substantive evidence to say that you took this money home, but we can find you guilty of abuse of office in terms of you flaunted a procurement law or a procurement procedure. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to do. Every person who touched this thing, who was an accomplice, needs to be in jail. It's sort of like the people who, the law that says that if you're caught with the stolen property, you're capable of a crime. That's what we need. And at the same time, we need to see on the president's side his decision to vet these people and take what is called executive justice. Fire them. Let them go to court and say, I was wrongly fired. It will cost the country 20 million shillings, mm-hmm. but it will save us 10 billion from what they could have stolen. Let these people go home. Let's pay the 20 million shillings. I'd rather pay 20 million shillings any day than watch them build another mansion in Rwanda using my money.
Or even use the same money to campaign and get into public positions. Exactly. Hezbon, as a react to that, the new DPP says he has enough evidence to apparently nail the suspects in the NYS scandal. Do you think this is like the right person, the fresh blood everybody has been talking about, looking for?
I must say that looking at what has happened in the recent past, mm-hmm. you'd actually see some, refreshing, way of handling corruption, because he's not just talking about this big fish and an introduction of a new lexicon, the big whale. He's actually talking more about investigation, mm-hmm. that investigation that will be sufficient to nail whoever is found culpable. But two things that come out clearly here is the fact that we are looking at, first, we are looking at the DPP in the current political dispensation. And we cannot really be fair to the other anti-corruption, fighters that we've had like Ringera, PLO, and condemn them for not having done much without looking at the wider socio-political dispensation. I don't think they failed. I think the system then, the failed them, especially during Ringera. I mean, it was characterized by this idea of it is our time to eat, and I think it was very difficult for him. Same to PLO. Mm-hmm. But looking at Nuruddin Haji, you realize that even the socio-political dispensation is now tired of corruption, and the political class has come out clearly to support the fight against corruption. But the third thing that I think I noticed about Nurdin Haji that should be lauded is the fact that he has now started dropping names of banks and saying that banks will also be investigated. And you know, from where I see it, you cannot fight corruption without dealing with the systems that facilitate that corruption in the first place. If you're going to steal billions of shillings, you'll need a banking system that will clean that. So if we sort the banking system so much so that money does not just hit my account, and it is in large sums that have never hit my account, and I withdraw it, if we just deal with that, then we'll have a cushion that will cushion us from individuals who think that they can use the system. And I think the focus by Nurdin Haji to target banks, and I've worked in the banking industry, is laudable. And if he continues with the same spirit, I think we'll have part of the system that we are talking about that is sustaining corruption sealed. Once that is sealed, I don't know where people will take money. If they are going to keep them in their houses, then probably.
Yes.
But they won't even be able to take the money because, you see, Kenya is very simple in how we do our rules. If you receive an amount of 1 million shillings and it is not a regular transaction that you do, the bank is supposed to ask you. So how Kenyans went and collected 60 million?
And I think that is why banks are also under shock.
That's what I'm saying.
Anyway, let me engage Dismas. I think we're all in agreement that the DPP is doing the right job. But
on the banking aspects, you cannot entirely blame banks because if your account has been playing around, say, 10,000 bob, and then on a day 3 you get 10 million, all the banks will be required to do is to ask you for evidence of this transaction. Have you done business with an organization? In this case, you present documentation from NYS that it's a clean deal. For them, that the business has already been completed. Because for them, they're only supposed to flag mischief. But the moment you provide evidence that it's a clean transaction, never mind the documents you're providing could be forgeries. For them, it's not their duty to go do investigations. No. For them, the duty is...
And Dismas, I think you've been a bit modest. You're not talking about 10 million here. There are accounts that have received about 200 million.
But you see, the moment you offer evidence to a financial institution that this money has come from NYS, National Cereals and Produce Board, and you table the evidence, then for you it's a wrap.
With companies that are almost non-existent. Yes, let me allow Hezbollah. Yeah, let me allow Hezbollah first.
What you're saying is that the fact that the spotlight will also be there is a good thing. You're not saying that any other person who has a lot of money hit their account is guilty. But the fact that if it is NYS, if it is National Irrigation Board, and there is money from National Irrigation Board hitting your account that had never realized 100,000, and it's 200 million. The fact that he's going to investigate even that brings a part of the system that has been sustaining corruption into the investigation table, which is a good thing.
Yes,
there's the anti-banking fraud unit. There's a unit that was hived off of the central bank, I forget its name, whose sole role is to follow transactions that are funny. And banks are allowed to report this particular transaction and give it 2-3 hours. Because the problem is, if the banks do not take that step that Hezbollah is talking about and take those 2 hours, that 3 hours, that extra day to just confirm, bring in your documents, this is this and this bank, please bring in your documents. That is the time that is needed to stop corruption in this country. Listen, a war against graft is won by the inch. Whoever can fight corruption, whether it is by delaying that transaction by 2 hours before the person brings it in,
that amounts to something.
It amounts to something. And we cannot ignore that particular step. And the truth of the matter is this: if we are very honest, this is how corruption happens in this country. On Friday, money is wired to your account. On Saturday morning at 9 a.m., 9 or 1 a.m., you've withdrawn. What kind of demonology is that? It cannot
Apparently,
work.
in the NYS one scandal, there's some transaction that took place at around, is it 2 a.m. at night?
Yes.
So don't you think that amounts to, like, should raise a red flag altogether?
It must raise a red flag because, you know, there are some curious transactions. Like, for instance, according to the DPP, a trader with NYS would call a bank and say, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, I'm expecting a tranche of 300 million, and I'm going to withdraw the entire amount 1 hour later in dollars. Now, that should raise eyebrows. That anybody working within the banking system must ask themselves...
But that is exactly what has been happening.
How does this fella know that tomorrow there's going to be 300 million, and an hour later I want to withdraw it, not in the city center, somewhere in Kiambu, and I want it to be in US dollars. Now, that one should be some curious thing, especially if it's a new transaction. But you cannot entirely blame the bank for transferring resources from point A to point B unless there's evidence. I mean, then in that case, the banks will spend all their time stopping transactions and flagging transactions.
No,
Mark, do you mind banks asking any tough questions?
No,
they're actually supposed to ask tough questions.
I have been asked tough questions on several occasions where I had to produce paperwork to show where these funds were coming in.
Yes.
And I had no problem with it because that's how you secure a country. That is the law. But the truth of the matter is, let me tell you, there are people who've withdrawn large amounts of money, received, not only just withdrawn, first the receiving in the account of itself is supposed to be queried. And then how do you show up? You've received 60 million shillings. If you are in business, tell me which business person will go and withdraw the entire amount. It does not work
200 million shillings at once. I've never seen how 200 million looks like.
What are you going to pay for?
Yes.
Let's ask the question.
I'm sure they come with sacks and
200
bags.
million shillings.
Ask Kabura if you want to know what it looks like.
200 million shillings in cash. What are you going to pay for? Let's just be honest. Let's ask the question. If you have employees, they're on payroll, they will be paid through the account. If you have contractors, they prefer their money wired. Who wants to receive 200 million shillings in cash? Only the corrupt. Let's be honest.
Husband, there's no way banks will escape this.
Let me tell you, you know, when you talk about banks, you're not saying that banks have not been doing this.
Yeah.
All banks have been doing this. And in fact, the lingo in the banking industry is abundance of caution. They actually flag all these cases. The issue is, after flagging, what happens? And that's why we are happy that now we have a director of public prosecution who's going to take this to another direction, going to investigate them. Because it is one thing for banks to flag, and it is another thing for no one to do anything. So the fact that he's going to do that is a big plus. And no one is condemning banks. We are just saying that now you have somebody who's going to help you flag some of these transactions that are suspicious. And if what Nordin is talking about is anything to go by, the first point of recovering some of these assets are through these banks. How did the money travel? Where did it end up? If we can get that, because ultimately, however much you talk about corruption, if we can recover all these assets, it will be a win-win for us. It will be a win-win for guys who are fighting corruption. It will be a win for Kenyans because at least we'll have these resources channeled to other areas.
Let's get a break from the banks and all these transactions. I mean, Marcus said these are funny transactions. I can call them weird because how can you move from 10,000 or to a non-existent company to about 200 million shillings in your account? Of course, that's a discussion that we'll continue with. But let's talk about one anti-graft body, that is the EACC. We've already talked about the DPP, we've talked about the IG. All these people have background when it comes to the intelligence. But the EACC has been very silent on this.
In my view, EACC is a waste of time. It's a waste of resources, and is a strategy by the corruption cartels to come up with another layer of bureaucracy to give them room to maneuver. All serious countries that have managed to fight corruption, they use the penal code. And from these NYS to a National Cereals and Produce Board, you're not able to see EACC anywhere. They're hidden somewhere in a closet. They're non-functional. And the DPP is able to work with the DCI and do the investigation. Maybe what we needed to do at the DCI is to establish yet another body, maybe a serious frauds office, that you give those people with the necessary technical skills for them to investigate this crime. When you speak to people who understand matters, prosecution and investigations, they'll actually admit one fact, that there is a human resource challenge, that some of those transactions, as undertaken by the architects of corruption, are so complicated that you require people with special training in forensic auditing, forensic accounting, such kind of highly rated professionals to assist you fight this. Because, this is a sad reality that we need to accept, that for the longest time, majority of the people who have joined the police service, they've not joined the service because of their IQ, but they've joined it because of lack of alternatives. Maybe we should now empower the Inspector General of Police to employ people with very unique, highly specialized skills who can assist them do this investigation. Because if you spend a normal policeman to go through that audit trail or to go through the chain of an LPO, when a requisition was made, when all these things were done, if they don't have that forensic accounting training or audit training, then they'll not be able to do it. And in a country like China, we have clever thieves. So there are people, clever accountants, clever procurement officers who set out to go and steal.
I don't think I'll choose to call them clever.
No, of course. I mean, for you to be able to plan this kind of a robbery, you go to NYS,
you have to be smart.
and you are able to get 59 million bob coming to your account after only supplying air, then you must be a clever man. I mean, it's not an ordinary guy from the village who will be able to pull this kind of a robbery. So you need an equivalent clever folks to work at the Serious Frauds Office within the DCI who can actually go through this thing. Because again, you don't want to have a complicated case like NYS when it's presented to the DCI for the investigating officers to start running away because it's too complicated, they're not able to understand it. They need to swim with ease. And maybe at this stage you should be exploring whether or not the DCI can actually retain the services of people like Deloitte and Touche or PwC, who are forensic auditors, forensic accountants, who can go to NYS today and within 2 weeks, they can point to you who are the thieves.
Yes, and unfortunately we don't have time to talk about, what is it called, the polygraph testing. I think it's something we can talk about after this break. But let me give you both Mark and Hesbon a minute each. Talk about EACC and why are they very silent on this?
EACC is one of those commissions that I think need to be disbanded, and we take those resources to bolster the anti-fraud unit that exists within the DCI. I think what we need to do, as Dismas has said, and let's give credence to our police officers. There are many police officers with degrees and with audit skill and capacity. What we need to do is create more jobs for them, make those jobs lucrative, protect them, make sure that there are people of integrity who will not get those jobs again to say, young man, I'm investigating you. I've found you've stolen 200 million. Please deliver 20 million to my account. And that's number one. But also, let's understand, there are things that are common sense in this country that we need to understand. The teller who is sitting at the till and is dispensing 200 million shillings in cash, doesn't it hit you that this person actually needs a pickup to carry those 200 kilograms? So there is some common sense questions that we need to ask. It's 200 kilos. How are you going to carry 200 kilos out of a bank? It is suspicious. And that is why there's a responsibility towards every Kenyan citizen who sees corruption to be a whistleblower. So we also need to create a system within the DCI where there's swift action. So I am a teller. I saw someone taking 200 million. Maybe it passed through the system. I can call a hotline, and the hotline can show up at this guy's house and say, okay, you know what? Before you spend this 200 million, let's find out where it came from.
The identity of your company and the history of your company. Esbon, your final comment on EACC?
Well, I think, the reason why we are talking about EACC right now and being dormant bodies because it has been overshadowed by the Office of the DCI and the Director of Public Prosecution. But I think EACC occupies a very significant place in the fight against corruption because it's the only investigative agency that is dealing with corruption. The Director of Public Prosecution has other things, the DCI has other things. So I think it's a question of finding a way of working together within these three agencies and revamping EACC. And of course, EACC has to struggle to link itself from political patronage, that there is that perception that we've had that it's been part and parcel of the political class that has been, so ingrained in this corrupt system. If they do that, and then we just have a situation where from the office of the DPP, there is enough coordination between EACC and DCI so that there is no duplication of efforts, and then EACC just focuses on corruption, and where it falls short, then it can be supported by these agencies. I think it will be a good thing rather than condemn it.
And I think we've had enough of this depressing topic on corruption, but we still have a lot lined up for you in the program. Of course, this is the Sunday edition, right on KTN News. At Don Sabwa says, these statements we have once been here. The battle ends at the doorstep of the cartels who are behind all what we are seeing. The battle ends at politics. Politicians, I believe you wanted to say, were the beneficiaries of such a loot. And let me take another one. At Titus, let me skip that one. There's one, let me just take one final tweet here from Don Sabo again, who says, the level of hypocrisy in Kenya politics will kill the spirit of handshake. Development cannot be achieved if we do not liaise and let Kenyans participate in the handshake. Of course, we're going to talk more about the handshake, the extended handshake, of course, which also, changed into hugs during the national prayer meeting. We'll have that discussion much more right here on a Sunday edition. But for now, let's listen into our soundbite of the week.
As Parliament, we are ready to work as a team to ensure that the legal framework, the oversight responsibility we have as Parliament achieves the vision of eradicating corruption in this great republic.